everyone. Today we are talking about lesson 11.1, which is our introduction to polynomials. So all of unit 11 is going to be dealing with these things called polynomials. So we should probably start with just a quick introduction to them. There's going to be a lot of terminology in this section, a lot of vocabulary that you'll need to know that we'll use as we move throughout this entire unit. So let's start first of all with what a polynomial is. A polynomial is simply going to be an expression made up of variables and constants. Constants meaning just numbers of some kind. Numbers that are combined using addition, subtraction, and multiplication. And then one last thing here, this does have to be with whole number exponents. Okay, so that's your full definition. Let's quickly talk about some of those things that are there. First of all, an expression is just kind of the math writing that we're used to seeing. Variables and constants means that I'm allowed to have both numbers and letters. And they're combined using addition, subtraction, and multiplication. So if you look at our example here, I can see the addition. There's a couple of them. I can see the subtractions. I can see the numbers. I can see the variables. We have these exponents, but they're all whole numbers. Okay, positive whole numbers. I don't have any 1/2s or anything like that as my exponents. And then there is multiplication here. It's just not quite as obvious. Remember that if I ever have a number directly in front of a letter, we assume that that's multiplication. So there actually is multiplication here between each of the numbers in front of my x's. Okay, so this is an example of a polynomial. We've actually worked with a few polynomial type equations before. Early in the year we talked about linear equations, which if I cover up the first part of this equation you can see. We also talked about quadratic. If I give you one more term in x squared makes it quadratic. And then I get these other ones and we'll talk about what those make these equations as well. Okay. One of the most important things we talk about when we talk about polynomials is what we call the degree. This is the largest exponent on the variable. Okay, so if we use our example that's here, my largest exponent is the 4. So we would say that here in the example, our degree is equal to 4. Okay, now that degree is really important because what it does is it allows us to kind of split all of these equations into different groups. Okay, if you look down here, we're going to classify by degree. That means we're going to be able to split these equations apart into different groups that look slightly different than others, and we can solve them differently, and we'll work with those as we go. Let's also talk about standard form. This is typically the way that it's going to be given to you, but sometimes you'll be asked to put it in standard form as well. So this is the polynomial is written in descending order of the exponents. So I start with my highest exponent and I move to the lowest exponent. So if you look at my example here, this is actually already in standard form. I start with my highest exponent of 4. The next group has the 3, then the 2. Then if it's not written, we assume that our exponent is a 1. And then I get to the term that doesn't have an x at all. The term that doesn't have an x at all technically is x to the 0 power. So that's always going to be our last number that comes when we put this in standard form. So we always start with our highest exponent and move down to the lowest. Next thing we get is what's called the leading coefficient. Hopefully, first of all, you remember the word coefficient. Coefficient are these numbers that sit in front of our x's. So the 2, the -3, the 1 that's here in front of x squared, the 5 are all coefficients. The leading coefficient is the one on the first term. So this is the coefficient. Or if you want to put that it is just a number on the first term in a polynomial. Okay, quick note here though, this must be in standard form in order to talk about the leading coefficient. Okay, so for our example, your leading coefficient, abbreviated as LC, is the number here in front of the x to the fourth term, so it is simply 2. Okay, technically you can find the leading coefficient if you're not in standard form. You just have to look for where that highest exponent is and use the coefficient on that number. Next thing, I used a word here in this definition that we should probably talk about, term. Okay, that's a word that we use quite often in math, but we want to make sure that we are very clear about what we mean by that. So term is going to be what we call the pieces or the parts of the polynomial. You can think of it as each little group of things. Okay, specifically they are separated by plus or minus signs. So anything that's separated by a plus or a minus indicates a separate term. So I have a term here of 2x to the fourth. We do take the sign from what's in front of it with the term. So the next one is 3x to the third, then just an x squared, then just a 5x, and then just the -6 is my last term. Okay, let's move on to the bottom here. We're going to talk about how we classify our polynomials. The first way we're going to classify these things is based on their degree. Okay, and really these just kind of go in order based on those different degrees, and they get these names based on that highest exponent. So linear is what we refer to as first degree. So anything that has a degree of 1 is going to be first degree. What that means is I simply have just an x. I might have other numbers around it, but the highest exponent I'm going to have, or that leading term, is going to be just an x. Quadratic moves up to the second degree, which means now I'm talking about an x squared. Cubic, you might guess, is the third degree. Refers to the x to the third. I'm getting ahead of myself. And then finally, quartic is the fourth degree, which is x to the fourth. Okay. Quick note here: the two that you're going to mix up are quadratic and quartic. Okay. The only hint I really can give you is that quartic, think of quarters, means 4. Quad does mean 4. It's kind of a bad name for this, but we've dealt with quadratics before. Think of the quadratic formula. We always had to have something with an x squared. So that one you kind of just have to know. Bonus one here if you do want it. Quintic is what we refer to as fifth degree. And that's the last one that gets a name after that. We simply refer to it as 6th degree, 7th degree, whatever the degree is, and they're just the word degree. Okay. Next, we're going to get classifying by the number of terms. So the number of things that I have as part of the polynomial also tells me a lot about it as well. Okay, and so we get 3 of these. Okay, the first one is what we call a monomial. This is one term. You can think of it simply as something like 5x. We have a binomial, which, if you know, prefix bi means 2. So this is going to be 2 terms. Excuse me. Example there might be something like 5x plus 2. And then we also have trinomials, which means we have 3 terms, which might be something like an x squared with a 5x and a 2. Okay, so 3 separate things there. So I've underlined your prefixes. Mono here also means 1. Okay, so you got 1, 2, and 3 as far as your terms, and then up to 5 for your degrees. Okay, one quick note here before we go on. Sometimes we're going to have multiple letters, which means we're going to get multiple exponents in one term. If that's the case, then the degree is those exponents added together, or what we refer to as the sum of those exponents. Okay, we'll see those in example 2 here in just a second. Okay, let's start with example 1 though. I need to classify these polynomials. Now when we do this, they all get two names. Okay? The first name is based on their degree, classifying by degree. Their second name is going to come from the number of terms. If it's helpful, you can think of this like a person with a first name and a last name. Okay? Every polynomial needs both. So if I look at A here, I have 7x squared minus 10x plus 2. Well, my degree is going to come from my highest exponent, which is the 2. If I go to my chart here, second degree is what we call quadratic. So this is going to be quadratic. And if I look how many terms I have a first group, a second group, and a third group. So I have 3 terms. So this is a trinomial. So this is a quadratic trinomial. Okay, let's go to B. B is not technically in standard form. A was. You could rewrite it in standard form if you want, or for what we're doing, you probably don't really need it. I'm looking for my highest exponent. That's the 4. Okay, so I'm doing degree 4, which is quartic. Be careful with that. In quadratic, 4 is quartic. And then finally, I have 2 terms here. So we use our 2 terms, which is binomial. Okay, so a quartic binomial there for 1b. All right, let's move that out of the way. Look at our second page here. Number 2, I'm still asked to classify these polynomials. So just like before, I'm going to have 2 names for all of these. My first one, I need to find my degree. Now, this is what I was talking about with sometimes we have more than one letter. So here I have both A's and B's. And so what I need to do is I need to figure out what is the sum of the exponents on each of these terms. And then I'm going to take the highest one. So if I look here, I'm going to add 7 and 5. If I add those together, it gives me 12. So the degree of this first term here is going to be 12. And add the next two, 4 and 9, gives me a 13. Then I have a 3 and a 6, which I can add to give me 9. So if I take my highest number there, is going to be the 13. Now 13 doesn't get a name, so we just simply say that this is degree 13. But I still need my second name, which is based on how many terms I have. 1, 2, 3 terms. So we call this a trinomial. Okay. I will say here, real quick, our names for the terms stop after 3. If you go to 4 or 5 or 6 terms, we just say it's a polynomial with that many terms. So if I had another term here that was not a higher degree, I would say it's a degree 13 polynomial with 4 terms or 5 terms if I had to. Okay, let's go to B here. Again, I have multiple letters, so I have to add my exponents together to figure out my degree. So I'm going to add the twos together, which gives me a 4. For this one, though, 6, you got to, or the second term here, you got to be careful. The 6 is the coefficient, that doesn't matter, but there is a 1 here on that x. So adding the 1 and 5 together does give me a 6. So we say that this is degree 6. Again, doesn't get a special name. And then I have 1, 2 terms, so we call this a binomial. So that is a degree 6 binomial. Okay, last one here. 3a and b. Really, we're just giving you an example here and asking you to identify most of those vocabulary words that we gave you from the front. So let's start with standard form. To put something in standard form, we put our exponents in order. And I always keep the signs together. So if I start with 3a here, my highest exponent is the 6m to the 5th. So that's going to be my first term. And it stays as a positive because there is a plus in front of the 6. My next term is the next highest, which looks to be the 4. So I'm going to have a minus 2m to the 4th. Okay, if it's helpful, you can cross these out as you go as well. My next one is going to be the 5m squared, but there is a minus in front of that as well. So this is going to be a minus 5m squared. Cancels out. Then I have a 3m is next. That's really m to the 1st. And then my last one is the plus 1. Okay. Quick note here, I didn't have it to the 3rd term. That's fine. I don't have to have all of them. I just have to put them in order of the ones that I do have. Okay. Leading coefficient is the number from the front once we're in standard form. So that's the 6. Degree is the highest exponent, or the degree of the first term, which is 5. And then number of terms, if I count them here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 groups. So I have 5 terms. Okay, let's try another one of those. I actually encourage you to pause the video right now and try part B on your own, and then I'll come through and explain it here in just a second. So if we go ahead and start for standard form here, I need to put them in order. So I take the negative with the 8y to the third, because that is my highest exponent. Then I move to the next highest, which is the 2y squared. Then the 14y, which is positive because there is no sign in front. And then a minus 9 after that. Leading coefficient here is the 8, the negative 8. Make sure you get the negative in there. Degree is your 3. That is my highest exponent. And number of terms is 1, 2, 3, 4 terms in that polynomial. Okay, so that does it for this set of notes. If you have questions, let me know, and we'll try to address them.